Blessed day, soul family. Welcome back and happy spring to you. Hope your spring is off to a great start. We're getting started here with plants in the garden, squash, tomato, pepper, eggplant, flowers, beets, and more. And we love to eat from the garden, from the earth, from the soil, and use that to feed the body's soil, connect to nature, and remember where we come from. So, today, Mental Health Monday, we want to talk about pain. We want to talk about the mask. So, for example, you are in stress, anxiety, could be physical pain, or in grief, but you don't want to show it. So, what does that have to say about your mask? What does that have to say about being authentic? And what does that have to say about, the people that you are surrounding yourself with? Why would they be open or not open to hearing about pain, stress, anxiety, and what can we do for one another just to navigate these concepts? So, interestingly, I just want to get this out of the way. I really appreciate the fact that we can have we have the space, we have the time, we have the social order to talk about individual pain, community pain, societal pain, pain on a species level. Because if we are in chaos and if social order has broken down, there is no space, there is no time for any discourse, any reflection, and that's a sad state of affairs. That is a little close to, for what I would say, hell on earth. So, we've been slowly progressing and we've been slowly learning. We, just in the last century, 50 years, outlawed slavery, outright overt slavery. We could say more on coercive tactics, of course, but we always have that dynamic of internal and external, right? Overt versus covert. What you can see clearly, um, what you can sense but not see, right? That's the concept of the slippery slope. Individually, in the small universe, in the body, once the body communicates a pain and starts to on a regular basis, and you start to deny it on a regular basis or ignore it or mask it, then that is also a slippery slope. And researchers are studying pain, thankfully. Researchers are looking at components of pain, but also what I found is the interest in the external factor, whereas pain doesn't just happen in a vacuum, but there's also societal components to how we express pain. Let's take a look. So one thing that came up for me in the research, was it this one? It's not this one. This one here. So this graphic is interesting, and it basically talks about here in the brain you have a clash between stimulus and the pain experience, And internally, within the brain, within the mind, historical, biological, and social determinants, and current biological and social determinants, and how they affect pain expression. So, right here. So, a little diving a little deeper into that, we have a little bit of a timeline. You have a pain event, you have the timeline. The pain event goes this way, and then it can go down here. So the person that experience is experiencing the pain, the suffering person, and then also the caregiver or others, others being society, your out group, your in group. They're both going to respond differently to your pain. So at the top here, you have sort of the inner component of the experience along the timeline. On the bottom here, you have a little bit of the outer component of the timeline. Okay. So the pain event happens here. So prior to that, you have biological, social, and determinants, which include genetic, legacy, health, familial, ethnic, socialization on the inside. Externally, biological, social determinants, drugs, cues for stress or expectancy cues. This is the interpersonal and the physical. I guess maybe this combines both. Maybe they both combine both. Let's see. All right, so when there's a pain event, okay, and I think this is talking about, I'm not sure if this is physical, I think it could be emotional, but we're going to dive deeper. Biological, social determinants, genetic, inherent, socialized meaning, those influence the pain expression, your genetics, what you've inherited, and I often attribute the familial upbringing. Actually, you'll probably see that, but that is going to experience or influence the pain experience. And then also the distress for cues, vicarious cues for distress or cues for expectations. In like you have a pain event and then you have an expectation of how you'd like people to respond or how you expect people to respond. And the question is, will that influence how you react and display the pain? So you have the pain experience as social, emotional, cognitive, social, motivational features. What will you do? So social skills and competence will influence or make up biological and social determinants. Cue signaling, consequences of various actions, and audience determine the social determinants. So the pain expression, it can be spontaneous or it can be considered. It can be verbal or it can be nonverbal, right? Now you have your caregiver or others, and so there's a decoding process. Okay. It the will society, will your group, or will your caregiver, potential caregiver, find your display reflexive or reflective? Will you be met with assessment or appraisal? Will people intervene? Will there be indifference? Or will they exacerbate the pain? So, for example, if you are around someone who is a professional, they may not exacerbate it, but someone who doesn't know about pain or the pain you're experiencing, they might exacerbate it. Biological and social determinants in your relationship or in your work responsibilities will affect how you display the pain, and then whether it's reflective or reflexive. And you're gonna display the pain in a different way when you are at home with your trusted family, and maybe there's not trust in the family, so that would be different. And in contrast to being at work, you're going to display differently. So this is the social, economic, and physical, ecological context of pain. So what researchers have found is that in psychology and in medicine, there's something called the social communication model of pain. That's what this image helps to articulate. And it's an interactive loop involving three distinctive phases: the internal experience, the encoding, which is how you express, and the decoding, which is the response from others. The so your personal history, emotional state, and the of the person experience of the pain is the internal experience. The expression of the pain is the automatic or deliberate translation of that pain into verbal complaints, facial expressions, changes in body posture, or protecting a limb. And then how do the observers, whether a doctor or spouse or community, perceive or interpret or validate or invalidate your display? So, from an evolutionary standpoint, the visual and the vocal expression of pain evolved primarily to elicit uh, care and resources from kin. So, researchers are giving the historical and evolutional context in terms of, well, how did we evolve as a species, and what was the influence of injury, stress, and pain in the evolution? So what they have found was, interestingly, the honest signaling problem is when evolutionary biologists point out that an adaptive dilemma where displaying pain can bring helpful benefits, making it an attractive signal to fake. Have you ever known someone to fake their pain or to draw it out or to try to gain something? So communities evolved with a cheater detection mechanism to spot free riders. And there's a credibility through cost aspect. For pain communication to be trusted, it often relies on unforgettable cues like bleeding. Okay, well, you can't argue with that, right? You have a very distinct, specific response from the body. Blood is coming out. So, another one in terms of the cues, so unforgettable cues like bleeding, or there's costly behaviors like protecting a limp, and that prevents the person from doing things they enjoy, a costly behavior. Physical and ethical communication involves the destruction of language and an appeal to ethics. Someone named Elaine Scarry, a philosopher, argued that intense physical pain destroys language, reducing humans to primal sounds. Conversely, phenomenological philosophers argue that pain is a direct pre-verbal ethical appeal. Drawing on philosophers like Emmanuel Levinas, researchers note that expressing pain strips away social masks, presenting a raw appeal to the empathy and the moral goodness of the observer. So we've been talking about the mask and the mask that we carry, and are we able to drop the mask, being true to who we are and to the moment and authentic. And so in some way, they're saying, based on Emmanuel Levinas, that pain can be a catalyst to dropping of the mask. Pain and the expression of pain can strip away social masks. If you have a like trauma bonding is a way for people to become more connected in that experience, in that bond. they drop their masks. They have nothing to perpetuate in terms of appealing to peers in a way that they desire to be to in a way that they desire to appeal. In clinical practice, communication acts as a therapeutic tool. So, studies show that when a healthcare provider validates a patient's pain communication, it reduces the patient's psychological distress, decreases negative effect, and can sometimes be as therapeutic as actual medication. And that's a good segue into trying to understand the mental health aspect because if you are in pain and no one validates that pain or can empathize with your pain or just even listen to the pain that you're going through, that's going to add another level and layer of distress to your experience. And when we talk about Qigong, we're talking about all of the energy that it takes. So it takes energy to heal an area, it takes energy to signal pain. It takes energy to think about how you're going to signal pain, which is something we just alluded to. And all the while, you're actively dealing with the unknown. So we know how energy robbing it can be to dwell on the unknown and the fear of the unknown. And an extra component of that is the anxiety. So fear is going to actively target the kidneys and drain kidney energy. And then worry, sadness will target the lungs. So there won't be adequate breathing and oxygenation. We're going to be continuing to go through this, but um, there's really interesting things that people are studying about their pain and about people's pain and the evolution of it. So, in trying to understand the broader biology of pain, a major problem immediately arises. The most influential definition of pain neglects all species but our own. The vast majority of pain researchers around the globe have accepted the following definition of pain from the International Association of the Study of Pain: an unpleasant sensory and emotional experience associated with actual or potential tissue damage or described in terms of such damage. And this definition was developed by clinicians and clinically oriented pain researchers. It's proven useful for defining human pain, albeit with some limitations, such as the lack of reference to cognitive and social components of pain that are important clinically. And in the process of revising its definition, this version is posed and is similar in wording to the previous definition, among other changes, and it substituted aversive for unpleasant, and it dropped the phrase or described in terms of such damage, which made it more appropriate for animal pain. So that's interesting. So, two definitional approaches have been used to address pain in nonverbal animals. One is to accept definitions that emphasize conscious experience, such as the definition says, and to argue on the basis of sufficient neuroanatomical, physiological slash pharmacological and behavioral analogies that certain species are likely to experience. So when we talk about behavior, then we start to get into the social aspect of pain. So, for example, my partner's a teacher, a kindergarten teacher, and they're taught that behavior is communication. And that's important because a kid could be displaying some type of behavior and they could be getting punished as like a bully or a troublemaker. And yet at the same time, at home, they could be getting bullied or abused. And with understanding that pain and behavior is a communicator, they can be more educated and understanding and effective in dealing with the child's trauma, and so as to mitigate the child's trauma and the disruption in the classroom. So this is probably a generational shift to many people, 40s, 50s, in their 40s, in their 50s, 60s, and 80s. Whereas probably in the old school dynamic of the pain, behavior, and classroom and social order paradigm, it was just normal and assumed that behavior was met with punishment and not taking into account what was going on for the person that was displaying that pain, right? And so that goes back to the understanding of the evolution and of the mechanisms that are important to understand. So, for example, we have to look at decoding pain expression, action, social, economic, and physical ecological contexts of care and delivery. So, even though pain is inherently private, behavioral activity permits observer inferences. Some features of pain reactions are spontaneous, some are reflexive, and others reflect conscious deliberation. Expressions of pain are often modulated with considerable sensitivity to the audience and the social milieu. So the expressions of pain are either enhanced or suppressed, right? Displays of pain command the attention of observers, leading to spontaneous neurophysiological reactions, reflexive distress, reflective appraisal, and the potential for empathy and clinical judgment. Experience with pain, professional histories, and personal characteristics, including biases, influence dispositions to attend, recognize, and understand the experience of others. So there's so much going on in terms of behaviors of people in what people are doing, and then how the community or how society responds to it. The appraisal of pain drives decisions to deliver care. Clinicians with personal commitments, indifferent bystanders, and enemies would be expected to react differently. For example, someone drives their car into a crowd at at the time that they're having a mental health breakdown or moment. So much has led to the event, the traumatic event, and so much trauma has been building to meet a threshold by which someone decides to act. So, the contexts of community caring, professional standards of practice, institutional structures and policies, healthcare delivery systems, the research enterprise, and political systems all have powerful influences on how people care for others in pain. Some people argue for universal health care, right? And the importance of having that sort of standard of care in developed countries. So going into the week, for example, Tai Chi Tuesday, we're going to be talking about your you're in an interaction where you're getting a behavior from someone that elicits an emotional response. How do you deal with that? We can talk we in time in terms of Tai Chi, we could talk about that as like a push. For example, there's a psychological push, there's an emotional push. And then what we learn in Tai Chi is, well, how do we respond? Do we push back? So if someone is having a mental health breakdown, to try to stop them from their behavior, keep them from interacting with you or influencing you or causing you stress, it's not going to be in your best interest to push back onto them or try to stop their behavior. And there's a lot of strategies and tactics that we can go into. But in Tai Chi, what we talk about is not meeting force with force. On Wednesday, we'll talk about the wellness aspect in terms of what would it look like for all of us to understand the nuances of pain, the studies that people are having with pain. In Resolution Thursday, we're going to talk about the societal impacts. Can understanding pain from this evolutionary lens help us to understand more about war and peace? And then Friday, we'll bring it all together and create a meditation and a prayer, and and we'll go from there. So, hope you're all doing well out there, and want to remind you to embrace the woo. And until next time, may your chi flow smoothly.